are going to have an awesome panel today around open data in spending. And so I'm going to let Hudson Hollister introduce everybody, but he will be our moderator for today. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. I'm excited to be here. When Socrata set this panel up to discuss the transformation of federal spending from documents into open data, I was a little appalled to see that we only have half an hour, because we could spend a whole day on this. And indeed, when our organization, the Data Transparency Coalition, hosts summits on this, we do. The Data Act is one of the most transformative things happening in the federal government right now. And for those of you who are non-federal, how many state, local, tribal folks do we have in the room? We've got some hands. I count 2. Well, I'm going to talk right to you. For those of you who are not federal, the Data Act also has an impact, and I'll explain why in a second. The Data Act results from about 5 years of work on Capitol Hill, and it is the first open data law. It's the first attempt to transform, through a legislative mandate, government information from documents into open data. I'll give the basic overview, and then I'm excited to report that the panelists we've got are the people actually working to make it happen, so we want to be able to turn it over to them. The basic mandate of the Data Act is Congress says that we're not going to use documents anymore to report federal spending. We're going to use data instead. We're going to use open data instead. In order to do that, the first task is to figure out what the format's going to be. The Data Act requires the Treasury Department and the White House OMB to do that. We have the Treasury Department here, we have the White House OMB here. So instead of telling you what they're doing, I'll let them tell you what they're doing. Once that open data format is created, then the law says that every agency has to follow it. That means that every federal agency, starting in May 2017, is required to report its spending information using this format. That's a big challenge. Every agency is going to hit that deadline, I guarantee you. It's going to be a lot of work. But what we're going to be delving into today for federal agencies is that as existing spending information, financial information, account information, budget information, grant and contract details, as existing spending information is connected to those standards, all sorts of new management possibilities become possible. I think I heard Coogan, the previous speaker, talking about how before we had an open data platform, there was no way for managers to see an enterprise-wide view in the health space. Same exact thing is going to happen in the financial space. As federal agencies' spending information is connected to these common data fields, then all sorts of new views will become possible. We'll talk about that. And for you state, local, tribal folks, I promised I would explain why this is relevant, why we're happy you're here in this room. That's because under the Data Act, there is also a transformation coming for grant reporting. State and local governments receive 60% of all federal grant funds. They have to fill out all sorts of PDF documents about how those funds are dispersed and spent. Under the Data Act, what's coming next is a consistent government-wide format, an open data format for grant reporting. That means that grantees, including state and local governments, can automate the reporting tasks that used to be manual. That's a lot for us to all talk about in half an hour, good heavens, but we're going to give it a shot. Here are the people who are going to talk about it. To my immediate left, Joa Iannata was, until 2 weeks ago, the Assistant Director for Forensic Audits at the Government Accountability Office. The GAO is responsible for all sorts of oversight work of Data Act implementation. Joa was doing that, and she has now joined Socrata. And so her expertise on what the Data Act means for accountability, for being able to explore spending, unparalleled. We're so excited to have her with us. To Joa's left, you see Christopher Zalesnik. Christopher is in charge of strategy for the grantee reporting pilot program. Remember how I mentioned a couple of minutes ago that the Data Act adopts a consistent format for grant reporting so that grantees can automate? That is what Chris's office at the Department of Health and Human Services is doing. If you care about grant reporting, you care about Chris. To Chris's left is Rebecca Williams, the of the OMB eGov office. As I mentioned earlier, OMB and Treasury are working together to figure out the open data format for spending under the Data Act. Rebecca is here on behalf of OMB to tell us how that view looks, what this means for OMB's management of all government. And then finally, we have the heroine of the Data Act of Treasury on my far left. Christina Ho is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Financial Transparency. If the job of creating government-wide data standards for spending is anybody's, it's Christina's. She's lived and breathed this since the Data Act became law, and she will tell us about what that means. We've got a couple of slides. We've got a clicker here for you, Joa. I'm going to call each of our panelists up to the podium so that we can all properly focus on them for a quick intro of who they are, what the Data Act means for them. And I'd like you to start by helping me to welcome Joa. Forward and backward.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, we
Next one.
I don't want you to look at that for too long. It's a little bit dreadful. Well, Hudson, thank you so much for including me in this panel. It's really a pleasure. Now, despite my recent change in affiliation, I would not be telling tales out of turn to say that the Comptroller General of the United States and the U.S. Government Accountability Office has been openly and publicly supportive of the Data Act. And for those of you who aren't familiar with GAO, this is unusual. Typically, GAO is neutral on policy. They get a little bit critical when it comes to program evaluations, but when it comes to policy, they're generally neutral. So for GAO to take a strong position to say how valuable the Data Act is and that it is potentially transformative for the federal government is kind of a big deal. But ringing endorsements from the Supreme Audit Institution of the United States notwithstanding, I want to just try to extremely quickly summarize in the very near term what I think the potential of the Data Act is. And Hudson, later, if you would like me to wax poetic about the potential for the Data Act to drive data analytics and performance management in the government, I'm happy to do that.
In iambic pentameter.
A challenge. But where I would like to start is what I see as the potential in the very near future. So I want to do what's become a bit of a theme at this conference, which is data shaming. You can take a look at this. This is budget information from the federal government, FY15. I don't want you to look at it too carefully because it is migraine-inducing. And for any of you who are not budget insiders, this is not easily understood. This is not information presented in a way that you can grasp what's going on. So here's just one more example. Again, it's a very small print. These are, of course, both PDFs, so you can't extract anything from them unless you want to do it by hand. But again, not accessible, not intelligible, very difficult to grasp if you are not a budget insider. Okay, so here's the potential of the Data Act. The Data Act, by creating standard ways of presenting and identifying data, can allow agencies to put together this kind of presentation. This is something that my mom understands, and she is not a budget insider. The information, you can see broad categories. They are understandable. They are relatable. You can drill down. You can click on different sections if you're really interested in public works, how that's funded. You can drill down to understand budget information and spending. This is an example from a city, so you can see lots of different kinds of categories of spending. Here's one more example. This is some information on federal grants data. Spending, budget. If just in glancing at this very quickly, you can start to get a sense of what kinds of programs, what kinds of subject areas we might be providing significant portions of grant funding to, just at a quick glance. So this is the power of the Data Act, to make budget information transparent, understandable to citizens. And I will tell you, as someone who spent a lot of time in the oversight community, this will be incredibly valuable, not just for the oversight community, but also for program officials who are constantly responding to data calls about their spending. So I'll leave it at that.
All right. I feel when the more people have to respond, whether it's through applause or questions, the more that you all will be engaged with our panel. We don't want to be an ivory tower up here under the lights on the dais. And so I'm going to make y'all clap a lot. Actually, if you want to just clap when you hear something you like, you can clap. Remember how we talked about what the Data Act means for federal agencies? It means standardized spending information available to everyone. For grantees, the Data Act means standardized reporting, which means that they may be able to automate their reporting in the future. We are grateful to have from the agency in charge, the Department of Health and Human Services, Chris Zalesnik. Come on up, Chris. There we go.
Thank you, Hudson. Thank you, everybody. I want to call everybody's attention to what's become a favorite chart with Hudson, because he's shown it quite a few times now, but it illustrates one major point here. What we're looking at here are common data elements amongst various forms within the federal government. This isn't the complete snapshot, but what it shows everyone is the relationship of how many different forms, which are the yellow dots, and how many different elements, which are the blue dots, that we're collecting. And not just that we're collecting it numerous times from numerous people. And when I talk to groups like this, regardless of what their affiliation is, one common theme keeps coming up, and that theme is we seem to give you the same data in multiple formats to different departments, and even within the departments, we give you that same information in multiple ways. It's burdensome to us. There's a wonderful illustration of that right there. Part of what Data Act is, and I'm going back to Joa's slides where she showed how we could data and make it more concise. Part of our exercise to get to that point, to get to her slide, starts with cleaning this up right here. What I do with HHS, and we are the executing agent for OMB on the pilot activities, and we're very happy to participate in that, is to help put initiatives out there that will demonstrate ways to Congress that we can reduce recipient reporting burden by reducing redundancies, by getting rid of duplication, by streamlining all those activities that help get those end charts that Joa showed you, so that when you go up to USA Spending and look for data, it is clear and concise, it's easy to digest and understand, and it's something that data that you can actually use and have the confidence that it's good data that you're working with. Currently, right now, a quick status on the pilot initiatives, because that seems to be a very popular topic, is we just recently, at the end of September, were able to finalize our testing initiatives, or test models as we call them, with OMB. We're currently getting ready to put a Paperwork Reduction Act notice out in Federal Register. That's going to take us about 100 days. We're also starting to collect names for those of you who are out there that are in the recipient communities, if you wish to participate in the pilots and have a say on how this is all going to work. Here is your opportunity. We highly, highly encourage everyone to get involved if you wish to be involved. We have numerous test initiatives we're working on. As we get those finalized, we'll be going public with them, and you should see something on that, probably the Federal Register notice, hopefully within the next few weeks. And then we'll start collecting names for recipients over the next few months. And we would like to start testing in the springtime. Those tests, I will want to get the message out right now, because I've heard various rumors, and I heard another one yesterday, is, yeah, they're going to take some time, but they're not going to be all-encompassing or all-time-consuming. One estimate was like, oh, you need us for 160 hours a month. No, we don't. We're not looking for that type of commitment. We are looking, and we're not going to ask anybody to do anything that's not out of their normal course of business or their normal realm of business. We are going to ask them to do things that they currently do, but we want them to do it in a slightly different way. And we want them to run some tests, and we want them to take some surveys. So we're not looking for an extremely heavy lift from people, but we are looking for a very wide candidate pool to work with on our tests. And I think I'll let it go right there.
We'll have questions for you in a minute.
Sure will.
In order for federal spending, for the federal financial picture to go from this to this to this, and in order for grantee reporting ultimately to be laid out like this so that software can automate it, the major task that has to happen first is what the Data Act requires. The Treasury Department and OMB have to figure out what the common data fields across all this information are and finalize them, establish the data standards. That's what OMB and Treasury are doing. And so for the OMB perspective on that very hard work and how it's going, I'd like you to help me welcome the eGov office's Rebecca Williams.
Hi, everyone. I might know many of you from my other open data roles. So I work at OMB in eGov has rebranded to the Office of the Federal Chief Information Officer, so under Tony Scott. We're in charge of IT policy for the Office of Management and Budget, but the OMB contributions to the Data Act they include my office, but they also include the Financial Management Office and then the Procurement Policy Office within OMB. So we're all inside management and budget in some sort of capacity. And then also we have some help from USDS and 18F folks scrubbing in and helping us out. 18F more on the Treasury side, but we've definitely, I feel like my role at OMB specifically is to show up to OMB Data Act meetings talking about data elements and then just talk about technically how it's really going to happen and trying to translate tech between policy folks and tech folks. Because a lot of this work, quite frankly, there's some funding for the Treasury Department, but agencies don't have additional funding necessarily to do this. They don't have in-house skills necessarily to do this, though we're working on hiring more folks that know how to do it, but getting to a point where you can get the consistent 57 data elements that we've decided on, even identifying what systems those are in across an agency to join them up is extremely difficult. So a few things that I just wanted to highlight about that process is one of the things that we've modeled the Data Act implementation off of is the federal open data policy, which is not a law by Congress, but hopefully,
not yet.
Hopefully it'll be codified, but was an executive order by President Obama and a policy out of my office. And we had common metadata standards for that. And we had like a first run of this project open data metadata standard. And so this is like very like high level like data sets, metadata, so like title, description, like all the fields you would have for data sets. And this metadata also applies to all like local Socrata instances or all Socrata instances. It's now built in. Socrata's been a great partner on that. But to highlight that work, we had a second iteration of the schema. And this is what it, like, so Data Act, I would take everything that you see about like what OMB is doing for elements as an iterative process. And certainly like as long as I am there, I will think of it as iterative. So that's like point one, like if you're thinking about elements that are missing. There's things that Hudson and a lot of folks at like my previous employer, Sunlight Foundation, wanted in the Data Act that didn't get in the Data Act. So what does the Data Act 2.0 look like? How do you get more granular information? Because a lot of it is just people thought that it might be in there or it makes sense if you're doing all of this work, but there's a lot of granular information that is not technically included right now. And so what would like version 2.0 look like? Like think about that. If you are at an agency or outside of government, you're in local government, think about metadata decisions or field decisions as iterative and something that you include the public in. And then the second point I wanted to make is, I think Christina will talk about this a little bit more, but a lot of the work that 18F did piloting the SBA project with the data broker, I don't want to take too much away from what Christina might say, but there's a lot of thinking behind that process, like how do you make financial agency folks, the work that this Data Act is, that's very hard. We can't like hire whole new suites of tech teams or procure new systems. We have like old systems, one including the federal procurement data system from GSA, which you can only like retrieve 10 data elements at a time, and it takes all night with like a cron job. Like it doesn't work. And this is one of the systems that must work to have the Data Act work. It's not good. It's a bad situation. And that's something that's like out of individual agency hands, since that's centralized at one agency, which is GSA. One of the things that 18F has really been focused on is like how do you make it as accessible to get this done? And through their broker process, instead of just saying, all right, you're the financial person on the ground, why don't you make a variety of different APIs for us? They came up with a system that was like, we need 4 CSV files, so 4 spreadsheets. put them in the system, see if they validate, and then we're going to do the work to sort of do that architecture on top. And there's a little bit of duplication across the spreadsheets, but like this approach really works if you're trying to get something done. Like how do you get it to like the minimal viable product of like the data that you need? Because the data is the most important part. The visualizations you can make once you have the data. So how are you linking this data up? And so metadata is iterative, spreadsheets are the easiest thing to do. Those are my 2 points.
Thanks so much. If any of this is going to work, if spending is to be transformed into open data, somebody's got to go through all of the complexity of spending, the financial reports, the budget reports, the payments, the grant systems, the contract reporting, as Rebecca just mentioned. Somebody's got to go through all of that heinous complexity and figure out how we're going to express those data fields across the whole government. That somebody is Christina Ho. Please welcome her.
Thank you. I'm glad that Joa got the data shaming out of the way, that she's no longer with the government. But I think it's, what data means to me personally is a real opportunity to really help transform the government. That is very meaningful to me. The federal government spent $3.8 trillion a year. As a taxpayer, you have the right to know where that is spent. And also as good government, we need to know how it's spent. So to me, it's not an option. I mean, whenever I tell people how much money federal spending is every year, they just get shocked when I mention that number. And I think that no one would think it's acceptable to be in a place where we don't know where it's spent, and also that information is not publicly available, and also consumable, not in PDF file. I know we can read. Treasury has been in the business publishing statutory report for a very long time, and they're in PDF, somewhere in some kind of text file format. But we really see this as an opportunity where when data is made accessible, it's not just for people to understand it, but also for people to use it and create values. One of the value that I have been seeing from, and I know some of the agency CFO has been talking about, is when they have better access to data without having to go through data call, it will allow them to make better decisions and will allow them to achieve the outcomes in a much more effective way. So now what the problem we're trying to solve in terms of implementing the Data Act for the agency reporting component is really how do we access the data from all these disparate systems across the government without spending a fortune and taking a long time. So that's really the problem that we're trying to solve. It's a big problem. But I think we've had some really great result working with OMB and US OSTP and and 18F, some of the expert in technology, we have been able to come up with a data-centric approach that's essentially similar to what Rebecca just talked about. Get the data exported in the local computer format from the system, and we build processes in, and the broker is essentially what's going to be used to validate the data and then structure it into the data schema, and then that will be in a machine readable format so that it can be consumed and published. We have been using the agile approach because data has a lot of nuances. Not until you work with real data, you are not gonna know all the issues around it. So we actually have been using the US Digital Service Playbook, all 13 plays. We are using it, and one of them is agile, and we develop we go through sprint a 2-week sprint each time. We also develop in the open. So because we work with 18F, all the pilot work we do and documentation are all online and open by default. And it's a bit of a culture shock and different from how we normally do things, but I think increasingly we're convinced that by doing that we allow people to participate and give us input. And lastly, our approach is user-centric. We need to focus on what the user want and not what the government think the user want. So we have been very focused on outreach and coming up with ways to get user input, not just on the data standards, but going forward on visualization as well. My boss has mentioned at one of the recent data transparency event that we will be rolling out a early beta site for USA spending, what the Data Act's gonna look like. We plan to do that. And so that's our way of taking a user-centric approach and allow the public to participate in providing us feedback on building the next generation of USA spending. So we're very excited about the opportunity, about what this could lead and all the value that it could generate. But we definitely need all of your input, and please continue to participate and continue to give us feedback and hold us accountable for making the progress that we need to make. Thank you.
Well, one way in which we're not going to be able to have time to hold them accountable is by asking questions in this panel, because I'm going to have to make one long slide to the benediction. However, if you'd like to stay, I'm sure the people who are doing the Data Act would be eager to answer your questions for a bit in this room. The Data Act is happening because Congress mandated it, because Congress changed the law. Sometimes in order to make open data happen, you've got to get Congress to change the law. That's what our organization, the Data Transparency Coalition, is trying to do. As far as I know, I'm the only open data lobbyist in Washington. We are grateful for Socrata's support and the support of our 39 other corporate members for this campaign. The Data Act is not where we're going to stop. We're not just working to persuade Congress to mandate open data in spending. Our next challenge is to persuade Congress to mandate open data in financial regulation. This afternoon at 1:10 p.m. in this room, we're going to delve into the Financial Transparency Act. But for now, we're still talking spending. I encourage you to come up and talk to our panelists. Thank you for joining our tour through the implementation of the Data Act. And do we have a housekeeping note? Oh, don't talk to them up here. Talk to them in the back. Thank you so much.